So Carl Benjamin of the Lotus Eaters has just put out a video in which he discusses this article from The Guardian. So Carl Benjamin identifies as being on the right, the traditional right. And The Guardian obviously is a publication that's firmly on the left. I would say the hard left. I'm going to do another analysis of basically left-wing thinking by someone who identifies as being on the right, but essentially is accepting a left-wing type of framework or framing of issues. It seems that people have been so immersed in leftism, in leftist education, in leftist media for so long that leftism is now the knee-jerk type reaction or just a natural way of thinking about things by people who are on the right. And to the point where they will accept left-wing thinking and they will criticize free market thinking while they are identifying themselves as on the right. So we have to think about it. They're on the right. They're accepting left-wing logic on economic and political issues. Then they will say, I am not a free market person. I'm against free market libertarianism, but I'm on the right. And so this raises the question, what makes this person a right-winger? What I don't understand, in the UK, what does it mean to be on the right if everything you say implicitly and explicitly accepts left-wing thinking? I don't understand what is the difference between the left and the right in the UK, because to me, in this video, Carl Benjamin is firmly on the left, other than that he doesn't like immigration. So that's going to be my argument in looking at his video here, where he discusses this article by Dan Evans. So the title of the article is Forget the Red Wall, the graduate without a future is the voter politicians need to woo. Evans is a leftist, obviously, because he writes for The Guardian. And the typical logic on the left is that they take leftist policies, all the policies that he critiques are leftist policies. And then it's a typical leftist strategy that they will take leftist policies and then they will say, I am now critiquing these policies from a left. But these policies are not right-wing policies. They were left-wing policies. And so the problems that they created by leftist policies. And the leftists will then sort of position themselves as somehow providing a critique from the left of these policies. But these policies were on the left. They are leftist policies. So who are they critiquing? It's the left critiquing the left. But the problem with that is that all they critique and all their solutions are just more of the same, because all it is they're critiquing what is essentially state planning. That's all that leftists have, is social engineering and state planning. And then they're going, and this is the planning and the engineering that will solve this problem on our leftist analysis. And then someone like Carl Benjamin will come in and say, yeah, but they're right. We're not free market. We are not pro free market. We're against free market. So therefore we believe in state planning and social engineering. We on the right just don't like immigration and the particular leftist policies. So the right-wing aspect of that position is that it's against immigration and pro, I guess, the more traditional way of doing things. Which means going back to manufacturing and tariffs on imports of steel, so that there are industrial manufacturing jobs for the laddies, the British laddies who were told to go to university and study, when really what they want is to work in steel mills, right? Because they're out of a job, because we are importing, the UK is importing cheap steel from China. And what we need is we need tariffs on cheap steel from China, so that the laddies, instead of studying and then being unemployed, can go and get manufacturing jobs. In other words, what we need is a state intervention. We need tariffs, taxes on imports, which will make everything more expensive in the UK, putting jobs of people who want or need to buy things that are made cheaper by the cheap steel from China, so that the laddies, the working class laddie, can get a job in a steel mill. Now, Carl Benjamin does not calculate whether the benefit of the jobs outweighs the cost to the other people in the economy. And it's not that difficult to go to the Mises Institute and find a lecture where they discuss precisely the history of protectionist measures on things like the steel industry, and estimates of how much benefit, how many jobs were saved due to protectionism, and how many jobs were lost in other industries that depended on cheap steel from overseas or cheap imports from overseas. You see, this is the problem with protectionism and this lack of economic understanding, that they can see, oh yeah, here we can protect this industry and therefore these jobs are saved. But what you cannot see, the invisible aspect of it, is the jobs that will be lost in other industries. In other words, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And the question is, what is the trade-off of protecting an industry versus, and then the result of that being more expensive steel, which is an input into other industries where jobs will be lost. Other manufacturing jobs will be lost. Okay? So that's kind of a quick summary. And the problem with all of this is that the trade right are buying into what are essentially the same economic arguments. They just give a trade coloring, where we are for the laddie, we are for the working class, but the left is for the working class. What is the difference? It's how is someone like Carl Benjamin on the right if you are essentially, your economic arguments are essentially for state planning. State planning is a leftist position. I mean, there's a whole debate whether the German National Socialist Party was on the left or on the right. So they were culturally on the right, so they were nationalists, but they were economically on the left because they were for state planning. So that is the position. We are cultural on the right. We want to preserve our culture. We're against immigration, but we are economically firmly on the left. So then that seems to be the position of the right. Basically, the trade right are state planners. They believe that the state can plan the economy and provide employment. Because all I see is explicit rejection of the free market. I had a look at the book by Dan Evans, who is a sociology major, and his analysis is a class analysis, and it's exemplified in his book, A Nation of Shopkeepers, The Unstoppable Rise of the Petty Bourgeoisie. And he does this Marxist class analysis that if you're a sociology major and a Marxist, well, that's what you do. my class analysis, or the one that I accept, is the Austro-libertarian class analysis that is spelled out by Hans Hermann Hoppe. He compares it to the Marxist one, and he argues that rather than being the bourgeoisie and the capitalist exploiting the working class, on the Austro-libertarian class analysis, the relevant classes are the taxpayers versus the tax beneficiaries. Taxpayers are the exploited class, and they're being exploited by the beneficiaries of taxes. Austrians do accept that there are classes and that one class is exploiting another class, but the way that the classes are identified is different and has to do with who's paying the taxes and who is benefiting from them. Okay, so Dan Evans examines the expanding influence of the petty bourgeoisie, a class situated between the working class and the bourgeoisie in contemporary Britain. Contrary to earlier predictions of its decline, Evans argues that neoliberal economic shifts have led to the growth of this class, characterized by small business ownership, self-employment, and individualistic values. Evans contends that the rise of home ownership, small landlordism, and changes in the labor market have fostered petty bourgeois individualism. He critiques the left's failure to address this evolving class structure, suggesting that the Labour Party has moved away from serious class analysis, becoming dominated by professional managerial individuals who perpetuate neoliberal capitalism under the guise of cultural progressivism. The book also explores how popular culture promotes values of aspiration and consumption, which hinder socialist organizing. Evans emphasizes the need for progressive politics to build class alliances between the petty bourgeoisie and the working class to effectively address contemporary socioeconomic challenges. Overall, A Nation of Shopkeepers provides a critical analysis of Britain's class structure, highlighting the significant yet often overlooked role of the petty bourgeoisie in shaping political and social dynamics. Now, this is kind of interesting because I actually agree with some of the things he says. However, I think his framework, his Marxist framework, doesn't really help. So if you look at home ownership, small landlordism, and petty bourgeois individualism, these people, I assume, will be taxpayers, right? So on the Austrian analysis that I just spelled out, these people will be the exploited class. And then when you look at the Labour Party, he says that is dominated by professional managerial individuals who perpetuate neoliberal capitalism under the guise of cultural progressivism. Now, he's saying two contradictory things. He's saying that there's a that there are professional managerial individuals and they perpetuate neoliberal capitalism. These managerial, I call them like the technocrats, are they in the government or are they in private enterprises? Okay, so let's say that in the government. In that case, they are tax beneficiaries. So they're the exploiters. Are they in private enterprises? Well, if you think about it, if you're a traditional business person, you will not be a professional managerial type. You will be an entrepreneur, whether it's a small company or giant company like Elon Musk, right? You are an entrepreneur. You will not be a professional managerial type, right? Now, in private enterprises, given that we're talking about capitalism, a lot of the managerial types, they will be in companies that are in one way or another benefiting from the state through taxation and regulation, right? So regulations will tend to reduce competition. And so large enterprises will then become, to some extent, monopolistic. And so entrepreneurialism will be less and less important. And the important thing will be management, right? And so you have these big companies that are established, right, that seem to be completely isolated from market forces, and they're so large and so insulated from competition that they can withstand doing completely ridiculous things like what Jaguar did, or all these, go woke, go broke type of stuff. They seem to be able to survive up to a point. So my assumption on an Austro-libertarian analysis is that these companies are not really subject to market forces, okay? So when people talk about neoliberal capitalism, what is this neoliberal capitalism, right? That is not really the free market. He also says that in a book that popular culture promotes values of aspiration and consumption, which hinder socialist organizing. But why do you want socialist organizing? Right? Why do you want socialist organizing? I don't understand. Why do you need social organizing? He assumes that because he's a socialist writing for The Guardian, and he doesn't understand that the best way of organizing and the ultimate form of democracy is consumer democracy. And the best way to organize is the free market, because in the free market, people vote with their money for goods and services that they find valuable. And any hindrance to that, whether through political action, whether it's the state or socialists organizing and causing problems, that is anti-democratic and anti-progress. Evans emphasizes the need for progressive politics to build class alliances, right? No, what you need is the free market. He assumes that you need progressive politics because he's a sociologist. He doesn't understand the basics of economics. He learned his economics in his sociology courses. Political economy, Marxist political economy. He doesn't understand how businesses and enterprises work. Okay? So it's not even in his vocabulary. So why would we accept that on the right? Are we Marxists now? Apparently we are. So let's have a look at this article. Now, as some intro, I have a background in education. I have a PhD in philosophy, and I studied at university in the 90s. And I'm very well acquainted with this issue because this issue actually already started to be an issue in the 90s. And these people are very late to the table discussing this because this issue has been around for a very long time. It basically, the whole thing of pumping people, at least here in Australia, I don't know whether this was in the UK kind of later on, but here in Australia, they started pumping people into universities in the late 80s and in the 90s. So I was studying for my bachelor's in the early 90s, and I went postgrad in like around 96, and I already saw that there was a glut of graduates, and that a basic bachelor's degree was no longer enough, even though the rhetoric was still that, if you have a degree, like even a basic degree, you're ahead of the game. But when you looked around, you could see that already it was difficult to get a job, especially if you were with an arts major, like a Bachelor of Arts, like me, the humanities, I guess. You basically had to go post-grad. So if you had a degree in accounting or engineering or something like that, maybe a basic degree was okay. But if you were in the humanities already, it was getting difficult to get a job. So I went postgrad and I got into a PhD program, and I thought, okay, I'm going to stay ahead in that way. But then I realized that was a losing game as well, because they were starting to accept more and more people into master's and PhD programs. And I could see that the quality wasn't really there. They were accepting more and more people that I felt were intellectually subpar. And I was, as a PhD candidate, I was teaching philosophy. When I was looking at the classroom and the students, I felt that I am not enjoying it because these people are not really intellectually interested or interesting. It was not an interesting discussion. It was all the lectures were basically, the discussion was like how to get these people talking about this stuff. And this teaching philosophy was boring. And while I was doing my research and I was interested in doing my research, my interest in teaching, academic teaching of philosophy was just dying progressively. So that when I got my PhD finally, I was completely burned out and hated the whole academic teaching because it was boring. I'm going to go into more specifics during this lecture and subsequent discussions. I don't want to read the whole article because it's just a lot of kind of socialistic, impressionistic stuff. So I got ChatGPT to summarize it for me. So in Dan Evans's article, Forget the Red Wall, the graduate without a future is the voter politicians need to woo. So he's a socialist and a sociologist, and his preferred manner of operation is political. I'm an anarcho-capitalist, and I believe that we need to get rid of the government. And I believe that is the only political action, is to get rid of the government and then let the market decide. But these people, they want to engineer society by identifying groups and then getting them up into some kind of fervor, political fervor, to activate them in order to achieve some political goals. I am completely against that. But that's his thinking. That is his socialistic thinking. And so his whole thing is how to get groups to think politically towards some goals that the socialist like Dan Evans wants to achieve, whatever that, like, opposing capitalism or whatever. And it's never clear. They're always fighting for something. It's never clear what it is that they're fighting for, other than fighting against capitalist, like some general, some general characterization of the enemy, okay, which is, neoliberal capitalism. And if you can define that for me, I'd be really grateful. Okay, so let's have a look at this summary. Who are the graduates without a future? So this group includes nearly 5 million graduates in the UK who are working in non-graduate roles. Despite investing heavily in their education, they're struggling with stagnant wages, high living costs, and limited opportunities for upward mobility. Many face an erosion of their middle class expectations, creating a sense of betrayal and disillusionment. So my comment on this is that, first of all, he's using an aggregate, and that's a red flag for Austrian economists, because the question is, how did he get this number, nearly 5 million graduates? Well, as I said, this has been going on, at least here in Australia, since the 90s. And I'm guessing in the UK, it must be something similar. Now, I already started seeing people either in academia or in various professions being underemployed decades ago, so 2000s. And so people get jobs, even they are, say academic jobs or teaching jobs, professional jobs of various kinds, but they are underemployed. So, for example, one big employer of graduates is teaching English. So after I got my PhD, I went into teaching English in Asia. And Asia is full of Americans, Brits, and some Australians as well, but it's mainly Americans and Brits teaching English. Are these people counted in this? Because the question is teaching English like a middle class career? No, it can be really well paid. The thing is, you are sacrificing lifestyle. You're living in an Asian country like China or some other country where even if you're well paid, either you're overworked or you're living in very uncomfortable circumstances because it's a market, right? So in China, they will pay you really well, but you are not the quality of housing, the quality of food, and the quality of lifestyle is quite poor. In other countries like Japan, the lifestyle might be better, but you're considering like on an hourly rate, you're not being paid very well. So any of those, actually, it's not really a middle class. I wouldn't say that it's a middle class career. And then you can try to go into teaching, like school teaching. But now, again, you have a lot of people competing for those jobs. And you're really delaying any, like family, you're delaying buying a house because you're living in different countries, you're living this nomad lifestyle. So these kinds of casual teaching jobs, overseas nomadic type, a lot of people are in that. I don't know what is the exact number, but I think a lot of people go into that. And this connects to immigration because immigration is actually a source of employment and income for a lot of these graduates. And if you were to cut immigration, you would lose a lot of the English language teaching outside of Western countries. And then you would also lose a lot of the teaching jobs within Western countries. Like here in Australia, for example, there's a lot of these language schools which basically depend on the migrants. Now they are employing fewer and fewer people like me, like Westerners, I guess, Europeans. But even the non-Europeans who are migrants from non-European countries, they are graduates from the universities here. So even if they're migrants, they will have graduated from a university here in Australia. So the whole thing is kind of like becomes like a self-perpetuating system where you have more graduates, but then you need more migrants and students to keep those people in employment because you see how that works. So it's a very complicated picture, and I will explain why I think that all of that is happening. Many face an erosion of their middle class expectations. Middle class expectations. Now that's an interesting phrase, and I think we will go back to that. Why are they politically significant? Historically, political focus has been on other groups. These individuals are often torn between progressive ideals and frustration with the system that has failed them. But what is the goal of political action? What is it that you want to achieve with your political action? Because if it's not climate action and social equality, so then what's his name? Dan Evans, then in that case is a traditional Marxist, and he wants to fight for the working class. What is his goal? You see, this is the problem with leftism. They have all these different goals. And when you're reading a leftist, you don't know which particular goals he or she is fighting for. Because they just pick and choose these political goals. What's his goal? I still can't figure it out. So economic and social realities. So he's identifying a problem, okay? From my ultra-libertarian point of view, the problem is distortion in the free market caused by people like Dan Evans. Okay? If there's a problem and these people are disillusioned, it's because they bought into a system which is not a natural free market, where prices signal demand. It's a managed market, right? And therefore, it's a distorted market. And so there's a problem. There's an oversupply. You see, a distorted market, which is the result of state management, creates shortages and creates oversupply. So it's shortages of some goods and oversupply of other goods. So in this case, something has created an oversupply of graduates for jobs that are non-existent. And on an Austro-libertarian economic analysis, that means that there is some problem with the market price signaling mechanism. And the question is, what has caused that problem? And the most likely cause, the assumption is that what causes it is a market, a distorted market. And the market distortion is due to state action of some sort, right? Whereas socialists, they don't, as far as I can tell, they don't really have an explanation of why this has happened other than there have been political decisions which are wrong. And now they will come in with the correct political decisions through political action. In other words, which is just going to compound the problem. Because in order to have supply and demand, right? So you have supply of educated, trained individuals going on the market. For that to work, it needs to be a free market because the prices have to signal demand. It's an information signaling system. That's the price system, right? So let's continue with this. Economic and social realities they face. Graduates are disproportionately burdened by student debt, rising rent prices, and job precarity. They often face de-skilling. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff other than there's a mismatch between the supply of university graduates and the demand for them. The risk of political neglect. Evans warns that failure to address this group's concerns may drive them toward populist right-wing movements, seen in other countries. So the right, according to him, is the populist right, which is nationalism. He doesn't see the right wing as being pro-free market. He sees the right wing as being populist right wing. Without targeted policies, they may embrace narratives that blame their plight on immigration, globalization, or wokeness rather than systemic inequality. Right? So this is the leftist bubble. And the issue is purely immigration. So the difference between the left and the right is immigration, globalization, or wokeness. So this is the position, exactly position of academic agent and Cameron McGregor, that they're on the right because they are against immigration, against globalization, and against wokeness. The question is, should the economic planning be left, meaning whatever this is, which I don't really know. What is he proposing? What is his leftist proposal that is different from the leftist proposal that has caused this, right? This is an intra-left fight. And then what is the right-wing proposal? I guess the right-wing proposal, we'll look at the populist right-wing proposal from Carl Benjamin, and then okay, here, sorry, I didn't see this. So here are his call to action for progressive politics. Evans suggests that progressive parties should prioritize this demographic, creating policies that address their economic and social grievances, which solutions include better protection for renters, so price controls, tackling student debt, so government spending, right? Giving the students money. So you're talking price controls, which means there will be shortages of housing. That is the economic result of price controls in the housing market. Housing rent, price controls in the housing market have always led to shortages of housing. Okay, you can go to Mises Institute lectures on the history of price controls in the real estate housing market. Tackling student debt, paying students money, meaning like paying off their debt, meaning inflation. Expanding access to well-paid secure jobs, meaning government jobs. That's what he's proposing. He's proposing more government jobs, price controls, and giving money to students. He's a leftist. He's a socialist. So you're going to get inflation. You're going to get more shortages in the housing market. It's just going to be a disaster. So by doing so, a progressive party could harness the frustration of this group and turn it into political moment. So basically, you're dealing, this is what I mentioned in my previous videos, you're dealing with the visible. This group is visible. They're making demands, and you're using that, and then you're paying them off, and then you're going to cause all these other invisible problems, right? Like inflation, like housing shortages, all that stuff. And then you're gonna, which is all gonna lead to basically economic stagnation, economic collapse. They will deal with a specific visible problem. Disaffected voters. You're gonna now target them with your propaganda. Look, we're gonna solve your problem, and then you're gonna lead to further economic stagnation in the UK. Because you're gonna get inflation, you're gonna get housing shortages, you're gonna get higher taxes, which is gonna basically destroy more businesses, right? The petty bourgeoisie, they're gonna die. Inflation will kill them. And of course, the petty bourgeoisie own the properties that you're gonna now price control. Lovely. I love it. It's a great idea. Okay. So yeah, this is his book, A Nation of Shopkeepers, that basically he's gonna kill with these policies. Let's have a look at Carl Benjamin and what he says about all of this. Now, before I do that, there's an interesting point here, because in my previous video, I was talking about academic age, the rentier class. And I'm now obviously sensitized to this word. Okay, here. He says, as industrial productive capitalism is abandoned and Britain embraces an economic model based on finance and rentierism rather than making things, graduates and non-graduates will soon end up working alongside one another in centers. And the reality behind Britain's Potemkin knowledge economy. I actually agree with the sentiment of this in that, yes, the new financialized economy is a Potemkin village. But the thing is, I disagree with his analysis of what causes it. And I also disagree with the idea that somehow making things is the solution. If things can be made more cheaply elsewhere in other countries, simply making things in Western countries just because it will provide jobs to people, to the laddie, to the British laddie, doesn't seem like a great idea in my view. And it's just more economic planning. I actually think that Carl Benjamin of the Lotus Eaters is on board with all of this. He likes this idea, and that shows that economic planning and leftist economics is really deeply rooted in his thinking and right-wing thinking in countries like the UK generally. So let's have a look at what he says.
This to me is a fascinating article by Dan Evans in The Guardian. Forget the red wall. The graduate without a future is the voter politicians need to woo. Now, you watching this may be too young to remember, but I'm old enough to be part of the cohort that was encouraged by the Tony Blair government to not only go to university, but have to take out a loan to do it. Because prior to Tony Blair, the system was that you would get grants, but you'd have to be academically gifted, or at least demonstrate that in school. And as someone who didn't spend much time in school, well, I spent my time in school, but like Intellectually, I wasn't in the school. I was doing the bare minimum, but I ended up with B's and C. University just because that was the course of your life. You were supposed to. Hated it and dropped out after the second. Went to Birkbeck. Didn't know this when I was young because there was nothing about the liberal arts that is promoted to young people, especially back then. It was all very much the government trying to capture the new wave of technology going forward. And I got swept up in that like everyone else did and found that it just wasn't for me. I didn't enjoy it. It was boring, frankly. And I'm going to be one of those people. If I hadn't fallen on my feet and succeeded in other areas, I may well have ended up as one of these downwardly mobile graduates. Now, Dan points out there's nearly 5 million graduates working in
Okay, so my comment here is that, and you will notice that is the government trying to do something? Is the government trying to plan to try to capture the technology or whatever? And the government has decided, okay, we're gonna plan by incentivizing people to take these courses rather than those courses. And it was nothing to encourage blah 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 blah. Well, the government should be encouraging either this or this. Education, if it was a free market, okay, it would be the people making those decisions based on market signals. A government bureaucrat doesn't know which way technology is going. I mean, a lot of these government departments they're always at least 10 years behind technology. And definitely the education system is always behind technology, right? So they will pump out, I remember in the 90s, they were pumping out people who were, because there was this thing about programming and website design. By 2010, these people couldn't get jobs. They were making a ton of money in the 90s. By 2010, if you were like a super duper website designer, you were poor. And neither the government nor the university itself knows which way technology is going to go, but probably the university and the free market is the best way to for people to make that decision. Like it should really be the lowest level of decision making, where rather than some bureaucrat trying to look into the future and say this is where the economy is going, right?
non-graduate roles. He says the much vaunted graduate premium, the idea that graduates earn more than non-graduates over their lifetime, is in drastic decline. New research shows that graduate salaries have fallen sharply in real terms over the past 2 decades, while minimum wage has risen slightly. So the point being, university is no longer a guaranteed ticket to social mobility and a better life. Now, there are lots of reasons for this, but this is very interesting, and it's a repudiation of the new Labour position that Tony Blair famously, education, education, education. Well, the kind of education matters. And Tony Blair wanted to see half of all people in Britain going through university.
This isn't just the UK. This is all, like Australia. I think all these countries, and I think also in Europe, they this is actually part of the same thing as immigration. Like all these governments and all these bureaucrats push in this direction. And I think it has to do with something like this is something that they feel that they can control. They think it's going to provide employment and it's going to give them more control over society. They don't really want people doing their own businesses, learning outside of the system, learning by actually doing things, right? Learning business by running a business. No, they want you to go to a school and study business and how to make a business plan. And they want to be part of you. They want you to take out a bank loan and write a business plan and take an MBA course. That is their worldview. It's the technocratic worldview. And so education, they've got hold of education through funding and regulation. And it's something they can control.
This is what could be called elite overproduction, as in preparing people for a life that they themselves will not be able to lead, because of course there is a dramatically small number of elites needed in a civilization, And so preparing and producing people to become the elites of the civilization just leaves many of them out in the cold. Now, that is a concern, and Dan addresses that towards the end of this article.
I actually disagree, because I think that there aren't enough educated people, and because education, first of all, education doesn't really educate. You go to a university, you study this stuff, you regurgitate it, and then that doesn't mean that you actually have useful knowledge. There's a few disciplines, like maybe philosophy, where reading is that's the only way to do it in university, right? But a lot of stuff that society needs, you can't actually learn it unless you do it. And if you learn it in an academic way, it actually sets you back. And when you look at it, people are actually not very smart. They don't know very much, even academic stuff, and they don't seem to have useful skills beyond kind of the menial, technocratic accounting or programming kind of stuff that you learn basically by rote. But when you look at the quality of things, for example, the quality of building, the quality of architecture, the quality of things that you buy, everything is actually being reduced in quality. There isn't much quality. And it's not that if you study that is gonna put you in an elite. That is a technocratic idea that which was the university was supposed to make you part of this technocratic elite or some kind of a managerial elite, and there's a limited room for that. But managerialism is not really the only type of skill that society needs, and also that can be taught. There's other things than managing things. And so this kind of assumes the kind of old model of education where it's basically technocratic managerialism. And I agree. But the thing is, technocratic managerialism, there are two problems with that conception. First of all, it doesn't produce anything, it just moves things around. And secondly, today, most of those jobs have already been technically replaced by technology. It's just they haven't been replaced in fact. So a lot of these managers, what they do, they're like those operators of elevators. There were these people sitting in an elevator pushing the buttons. There was a job, right? The vast majority of modern technocratic managerial jobs, they're basically make work. They're things that could be replaced by an app. I don't understand why you would need a lot of these managers. Like, for example, accounting. I can't imagine that AI can't just do the taxes. Like, why would you need an accountant? Maybe there's still some role for these people, but less and less, I imagine. That is my view, because I see so many jobs where someone does something and I'm thinking, first of all, it's not necessary to do that. But let's say, assuming that that's a useful thing, like people blowing leaves with a leaf blower. Let's assume that all of that can be automated. So more and more I see people doing jobs that when I think about it, I think this person could be easily replaced by either an app or some kind of robot, some kind of a machine.
Cool. I think we'll get to that in a minute. But why did they do this? Why was this what they had planned? And it is because they are a certain kind of person. They are the sort of managerial, rationalistic, bureaucratic, technocratic types. And all they could see myopically was, well, technology is changing and we will need to just have everyone doing that same thing.
Yeah, so he's totally he's totally right there, right? He got that all exactly. This is the managerial, bureaucratic elite, technocrats, and all they can do is they have a spreadsheet, and they see everything through their spreadsheet. It's a spreadsheet mentality. And they don't think that technology is this kind of unpredictable thing they, that is gonna, you don't know where it's gonna go. It requires creativity to produce, and then it's unpredictable and emergent. They see technology as more control. That is their thinking of technology. There's more control, more spreadsheets, more linear thinking. So they see technology through their technocratic mindset. And so when they go, you're going to study technology, they think you're just going to study stuff that leads to more control, right? We need more people sitting at their keyboards controlling. They don't think, well, actually, technology is going to replace anything like that, anything linear, anything predictable, anything of that kind won't need people because technology will replace them. And early on, you might need a whole bunch of these people, but then the technology that they will produce will replace them. So they will make themselves redundant. That is my perception, this idea that, you need a ton of engineers. At some point you need, engineers, but these engineers are just doing stuff to make other humans obsolete, like people working at checkouts in supermarkets. And then they're making themselves obsolete as well. The whole thing depends on making people obsolete through standardization, through greater efficiency, and through economics of scale. And automation, of course. It's just scale and automation. It just replaces humans, which you can decide is good or bad, but it's just a reality. So you have to start with the reality of the situation that technology and people that you're going to train for technology, they will replace other people from their job, and they will also replace themselves.
As many people as possible, and somehow we will end up capturing the future. Well, it didn't work, did it? It, in fact, left many of our people essentially out in the cold. The withering away of apprenticeships and practical work that everyone now, it's a constant refrain. Oh, we need Polish builders and plumbers to do the manual labour. It's like, we used to have English builders and plumbers doing manual labour. And they still do. There are still, obviously, a large number of those. Why did we act as if this was somehow an ignoble profession, or a profession that actually was beneath our dignity to do? And again, this is a common refrain from, again, my parents' generation. There are certain jobs that are beneath people's dignity. You don't want to be like that person. It's like, okay, but that person has got a steady job and earns like 60K a year and runs his own business and is doing very well. He can afford his own house. Going to university.
Well, yeah, but there's a couple of problems there. First of all, that market is also a function of supply and demand. So yeah, you would have to cut off immigration from Poland, right? Because these people are bringing competition in that market. So you would have to create a barrier of entry from, say, Poland. So Polish plumbers are not competing with British plumbers. But then, so let's say you cut off the Polish plumbers and whatever other nationality, but then you have these people who went to university to go into plumbing. You see, then that would lower the wages of the plumbers, I guess. The thing is, you can't plan it out. You don't know what's going to happen because it's just naturally the more supply, the lower the demand, and that pushes the price of labor down, right? And so if you try to plan it out, it generally doesn't work because you don't know what the price should be. So you're saying, well, on the one hand, you're saying these tradies, they are earning a lot of money. We call them tradies here in Australia, right? They're earning $60,000 or pounds a year. But then you're saying that you have these Polish tradies coming in, and people are now preferring the Polish tradie because if I have like some stuff I need to do, I want to build an extension to my house, then the British tradie is too expensive. I can't afford it. So but I can afford the Polish tradie. So you're saying, well, we're going to cut off the Polish tradies so that the British tradies can keep their 60,000 pound a year income. But then the person who would have built the extension to their house, if he could get a Polish tradie, now can't afford that. So you've benefited the British tradie, but you've disbenefited, you've caused the opposite effect to the British people who would have hired the Polish tradie. You see, so here's a visible, the British tradie, they want to keep their income, but you're not taking into account the people who prefer that. You see, this is the problem with planning. There are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And you go, well, I'm a populist, I'm a right-wing populist, and I want the British tradie to benefit. But what about the British consumer of tradies? They're British too. And now they can't afford an extension to their house. I'm not saying that I'm for Polish tradies. I'm just pointing out that you're benefiting one group of British people over another group. And you have to mention that. You see, you're only looking from one side. And the Austrian economists are saying anytime that you try to manage things, you will have winners, losers. And I'm not saying that I'm talking about the Polish traders being the loser. I'm talking about this British person is the winner, and then this British person is the loser. And then why do you decide that benefiting this British person is more important than benefiting or otherwise this British person? You see how that works?
As Dan points out, is no longer a guaranteed ticket and is putting them in this downwardly mobile cohort. And that 5 million people is not a small number. He points out that this British middle class dream is falling apart as the new graduates are unable to join its ranks. Yeah, why would the old graduates want to make space for them? Again, there's only so much space that can be occupied by this kind of person. And so he says large swaths of young people born in the 1980s and after have been proletarianized. They're experiencing the jarring shock of downward social mobility. Who betrayed you? Who betrayed you? Who made up a story, a fantasy, and sold it to us? And then it turns out that actually wasn't going to be. Who did this to us? Oh, it's the Labour Party. Of course it's the Labour Party. It's the left, more broadly, and their dream of what the world could be. It's a fiction. It didn't come to pass. And now, millions of people in Britain are saddled with exorbitant student debts, no path ahead to get ahead in life, because there are no prospects for someone with like a gender studies degree or some nonsense. And that's just one of like a whole.
I don't think it's just a problem of gender studies degree, because all of modern education is actually schooling. It's not education. There's actually, I'm interested in homeschooling, and there is a woman in the UK who has books and courses on homeschooling, and she's saying, well, you can educate your kids or you can school them, but you can't do both. And this is increasingly the view on the libertarian right, the also libertarian right, that what people call education today is not education at all. It's schooling. All it teaches, and you have to be a teacher to sort of be in this conversation, right? If you're not a teacher, if you haven't been a teacher for a certain amount of time and looked at how education functions and what goes on in teachers' rooms and administration, these education administrations and the teaching market, it's very difficult to understand. But basically, education, what we call education, that word, education, gives you the wrong idea of what it is, which is schooling, which is basically getting students to, internalize some material and then regurgitate it. Okay. And it's not like that the gender studies degree is not useful. Because as I said, for example, the programming degree, I've met people who are making very, very large salaries in the 90s and even early 2000s who by 2010 were basically out of a job because they learned database. And there was no jobs for database by 2010 or website design or stuff like that. And these people had some narrow specialization that they learned they basically they were redundant within, and that is the norm. And the idea that it's only like gender studies degrees or stuff like that. Education is basic, at a basic level, nothing that more than teaching for government type jobs. So one way to think about when people talk about the middle class, I couldn't figure out what the middle class means. What do people mean by the middle class? Because I'm a European and I grew up with a kind of European concept, which here in these countries would be called upper middle class, the bourgeoisie. And the bourgeoisie were people who were culturally middle class. So they had certain cultural style. They read books, they were literate, they were into classical music, they were kind of into high culture, they were well spoken, right? Manners are important. That's kind of like the European concept that I grew up in Eastern Europe. That's how I grew up in an upper middle class culture, which made me quite different from my peers because I grew up in socialist Poland where I was stuck in school with people who were not middle class. And then here in Australia. And I could always feel the really big difference between myself and the other kids. And to me, they were culturally and psychologically working class. And I couldn't relate to these people. And so when I got to university, I was like, yeah, finally, I'm in a place full of books, people discussing ideas. I feel at home here, right? But when people talk about this upward mobility and middle class, a lot of these people, upwardly mobile middle class people, to me, they seem to me like a kind of a technocratic working class. In other words, they have these technical corporate jobs, but they're not culturally middle class. They still think in these very working class ways and behave, right? They just have money. I guess you could call them new money, something like that. And they have very working class tastes. I was kind of shocked when one of the lecturers, because I was doing a PhD in philosophy, and one of the British guys, he was a new lecturer in the department. He did a party, and we went, and he was playing like Brit rock, like kind of punk Brit rock kind of stuff. I was like, "What's wrong with him?" He was a lecturer. He was like this Dan Evans, a working class background, academic, was philosophy, but it's the same as sociology, like, writing the same kind of stuff, but in a philosophy department. His background was working class and he was very working class, but he was in the philosophy department. And for me, I started realizing that academia does not really divide people into classes in a way that I would imagine. And I just felt less and less at home in that environment because their concept of the middle class is this kind of leftist concept where a working class person is now in a kind of an educational, technocratic kind of position. He's lecturing philosophy or he works for the government. But to me, that is not cultural middle class, the way I understand the cultural class system in Europe. I guess they would identify that as upper class. I don't understand the British because they have this upper class, then you have these laddies, and then you have these other people. I don't understand it. It's not very clear. To me, the laddie is a very working class, culturally working class kind of person. It's too the whole thing is too complicated. But to get back to my original point, this idea, this technocratic idea of the middle class is really a technocratic corporate office job with a spreadsheet. That's the middle class. That's a middle class job is a government type job. It could be in a company, but it's the same thing. It's a managerial, bureaucratic type job. And what they want is they want to pump everyone into sitting at a computer, filling out a spreadsheet and running reports. So the thing about that is that that doesn't produce anything. Like it's a very narrow function in a large corporation. You need these middle managers, but you don't need that many of them. You need some, but you can't build a whole society. But because these people believe that that is somehow the ideal thing, the ideal human, the ideal existence is you're managing and planning and controlling things. And actually, there's a guy, a British guy, Ian McGilchrist. He's a neuroscientist, and he wrote a book. And his thing is that he's into the left brain, right brain split. That the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere have different type of function. And his idea is that the left is basically kind of a manipulative, focusing on stuff and then controlling it and manipulating, and it's kind of decontextualized cognition. Whereas the right is a kind of more holistic, contextualized cognition. And he argues that the left type of cognition, the left hemisphere type of cognition, has basically taken over society, where people are incapable of broad contextualized thinking. Everything is kind of left-brained, decontextualized, technical thinking. And I think, yeah, that's exactly right. When I talk to these people, these managerial types, and there's so many of them, all these kind of middle-class progressive types, they're all like that. They're incapable of thinking broadly and contextually. Everything is very technical and rigid. So I'm not against technical, logical analysis, but it has to be contextualized. Whereas their cognitive style is a kind of a bureaucratic, technocratic, ahistorical, decontextualized thinking that is very rigid. They don't seem to be able to think, basically. And I think that the modern education, that's what, when they talk about technology, that's what they mean, is linear thinking, decontextualized, ahistorical, very instrumental, right? And I think I'm going to make some videos about that. It's a very interesting perspective. But that's what education is these days. That's what it trains. And these people, after decades of that, are incapable of thinking. And I think that's why these people can't get these managerial jobs where they're filling out a spreadsheet, and then they can't do anything else. Like they're unable to move, like to shift to something else where they can use their skills, because all their skills is pen pushing. They're trained into being technocratic bureaucrats, and unless they get the kind of job, they're screwed.
Or swathe of degrees that are just not very practical, right? And you can be like, well, I mean, did you get your job in the philosophy mill? I'll say, yes. You're listening to the product of it right now. This is what I'm using my philosophy degree for. There is actually a place for this. Anyway, he says hundreds of thousands of people, young people, are either renting a tiny room in the city or living back home.
This kind of proves my point that he studied philosophy, and philosophy has enabled him to think more globally and contextually, and I guess laterally. He's, actually developed his right brain, and so he was able to apply this to developing a business. But there are parts of philosophy, in particular analytical philosophy, that I was trained into. And if you're not mature enough, you can get stuck in a kind of, very narrow technocratic thinking. But generally, I think education encourages a technocratic, rigid mindset. But I think what he just said supports my point, my argument.
Home, in a regional town with mum and dad. Yeah. They will realize their dream career is a mirage. All that work for a life of permanent debt and struggle. Yep. And it doesn't really help when the borders are wide open, does it? It doesn't really help when you're saddled with a degree that you don't need.
Okay, so here he's making this argumentative move to the populist right wing. But you see, so immigration is responsible. How about this other perspective, which is my perspective? Government planning and government control of education and statist technocratic education is to blame. So if you change the education system away from this technocratic stuff, and so for example, one change is to basically turn universities into just giant libraries where you go and you read stuff, whatever you want, there might be sections, and you're going to read on the subject, and then you prove that you've read something by some kind of a general test, qualitative measure, right? And you do it like that, rather than you have a course and the lecturer gives you the material, you internalize the material, and then you regurgitate the material, and you move on to the next course. So rather than this linear kind of stuff, you make it the traditional model of people reading books, or maybe doing stuff in laboratories, labs, something like that. I think that's where education is heading, where the internet is a giant library, and you will prove that you're educated when you can show that you've read a certain number of books and you process this information, and then you can show it. But it's not just regurgitating stuff in a way where you're given the material by the lecturer and then you're regurgitating it. Change the education system and make it free market in particular, where you pay for it yourself and the state doesn't decide on it. You decide. The government is not involved, or just basically it's also a free market. Like homeschooling, right? Homeschooling is the parents decide how to educate the kids, and they choose some company that provides the homeschooling materials, and it's a free market on how the whole thing is delivered. Maximally free market. You see no immigration discussion in this at all. So that's an alternative perspective, that the problem isn't with immigration. And I'm not pro-immigration, and I'm not against limiting immigration. I'm just saying you've just moved from one issue where people were trained in this technocratic educational system. And let's say when I graduated, there was no mass immigration. But this was already a problem. This was already a problem in the 2000s, right? So just one example is, people who were training programming, particular kind of programming, that became very quickly redundant. This is a problem. There was a problem before all the mass immigration here in Australia. And also there's the issue of redundancy generally, that whatever you're trained in, even if you're not replaced by immigrants, you're going to be replaced by automation. So why is immigration the go-to place? You see, because this guy just wrote this article on an issue that has been around for decades in Western countries. And I don't think Australia is different, because we're getting a lot of Brits coming to working in universities here in Sydney and talking to them. I just go, and I also worked with English teachers in Asia. And my general impression is that this is nothing new, and it has preceded this really big mass migration by at least a decade. And the problem is state planning and technological progress leading to redundancy. And even without all the immigration, it would still be a problem.
And you can't even get off the first rung of the ladder because there's so much excess competition for the jobs that you are not trained for, but are going to have to apply for because your degree is worthless. Your degree has no application in these fields. That doesn't really help, does it? But of course, Dan doesn't bring that up. This is something that we're just going to ignore because the left has constantly done this. Ever since probably about the 1980s, the left has decided that actually we're not going to worry about competition for jobs, right? We don't care if the labour market is not a seller's market. We actually are in favour of becoming a buyer's market because of anti-racism. So, that's brilliant. Incredible sellout of the working class here. So the left and Labour Party have done all this. Don't get me wrong. I hope you don't misconstrue this as being somehow tacit support for the Conservatives. Of course,
I don't fully understand his point about seller's market and buyer's market. So, but I understand that he's distancing himself from the left on the immigration issues. So the left are pro-immigration, and so they don't want to talk about the fact that there is too many people coming into the market, and so it's an employer's market, and the left don't want to talk about it. Whereas Carl Benjamin, wants to talk about it being an employer's market, and he wants it to be the employees market, because sellers and buyers, who's selling and who's buying? So what if you're a seller, you're selling employment, you're selling work, you're the employee, and the buyer is the employer. Let me just go back to check.
Don't get me wrong, I hope you don't misconstrue this as being somehow tacit support for the Conservatives. Of course, any conservatively minded person should have been able to identify this. Probably about the 1980s, the left has decided that actually we're not going to worry about competition for jobs, right? We don't care if the labour market is not a seller's market.
We don't care if the market is not a seller's market. So it's not the market of the worker. So the seller is the worker. So they're on the left, but they are not in favor of the worker.
We actually are in favour of becoming a buyer's market because of anti-racism.
So we're in favor of it being a market that favors the employer, who's the buyer of labor, because we are against racism, and making it a seller's market would be racist because it would mean limiting immigration. So now Carl Benjamin is on the right, but he's on the side of the worker. You see, this is the problem. What makes Carl Benjamin on the right other than that he's anti-immigration? So in the UK, the left and the right are completely identified in terms of their attitude to immigration. That's so odd. That is this one issue that splits the left and the right. And they're both pro controls that favor one side or the other. So they're against the market, the free market, deciding what the price of labor is, which would be the market sending a signal, we need more of these kinds of workers and less of these kinds of workers. No. They're both for planning. The issue is what kind of planning. I guess that's how it is.
That's brilliant. Incredible sellout of the working class here. So the left and Labour Party have done all of it.
Right? So Carl Benjamin is on the right, but he's against selling out the working classes. That sounds like he's on the left. You're for the working classes, you're for this class as opposed to this class. That's not right. That's not on the right wing. It's, you see, to me, that is leftist thinking.
Don't get me wrong, I hope you don't misconstrue this as being somehow tacit support for the Conservatives. Of course, any conservatively minded person should have been able to identify these problems long in advance. And since we've had mostly conservative government over this time period, since the 1980s, they could have headed this off at the pass. They didn't because they're ignorant and they don't care, right? Anyway, so he says, it's clear that many in government do not understand the material conditions that drove young people to left-wing politics, seen during the Jeremy Corbyn years, but do not understand the material conditions that drove young people to left-wing politics, seen during the Jeremy Corbyn years. Well, it's not just that. Like, the left doesn't understand the material conditions that drove, say, Essex to Thatcherite politics, right? This is a blind spot on both sides, but he's not wrong. He's not wrong. Conservatives didn't understand, New Labour don't understand, Starmer's government don't understand, and they don't really care. They're not really that bright. They don't really have a proper coherent plan for the future, which...
Yeah, you see, this is the problem, that they don't have a plan for the future. No government, the government cannot have a coherent plan for anything because planning doesn't work. They have some levers that they can push and pull, but I think politicians have already figured out that whatever they do, other than in terms of the optics, it makes no difference. If anything, it will make things worse. It will be kicking the can down the road. I don't know whether the politicians know this, but economic theory has shown repeatedly that whatever the state does will only make things worse. And so all they do is optics. And Carl Benjamin believes that a government can have a coherent plan. And I think Carl Benjamin needs to watch some videos by Peter Hitchens and his experiences in Soviet Russia and the effects of state planning and how great that was. But in the UK, both the left and the right believe that planning, that you can have a coherent plan that will work. No, you cannot. What they're gonna decide what the universities teach. So they're gonna now invest in trades. So that's gonna be bad for the universities, but it's gonna provide. So let's say you do like a technical college, you put money in there. That means you're gonna have to take money away from and students away from universities, I guess. So that's gonna be bad for the universities. You're gonna invest in trades. You're gonna have more plumbers. Is that the idea? That's a more coherent plan. Do we need more plumbers or more carpenters? And how many plumbers do we need and how many carpenters? And why do people need to study plumbing or carpenting? Why can't they just start doing it and learn it on the job?
They don't really have a proper coherent plan for the future, which I think is the most self-evident thing in the world. But he points out they feel this group is not electorally significant and worth losing. But much like Peter Mandelson's hubristic quip that Labour could afford to abandon the working class because it had nowhere else to go, which is interesting, this underestimates a potent political force. And I think on this he is right. We should actually have something for these people. Like a sensible right-wing party would say, well, look, you have actually been betrayed by New Labour and the Conservatives, Reform, and maybe you could offer some kind of retraining scheme or something like that for those people who haven't got the opportunity because there are just simply not enough jobs available. And again, 5 million people, that is a lot. You know, offering retraining schemes or something like that might be really good, actually.
Retraining in what? Plumbing? How about YouTuber? You see, the technology is changing. It's moving forward. You don't even know whether you're gonna need plumbing. I guess you're always gonna need plumbers, but I mean, plumbing technology might change. You might start getting more automation in plumbing. Who the hell knows? I don't know what the numbers are, but the problem is that the way in which an economy normally functions is that the prices signal the demand. And so if the price is relatively high, this will lead to increased supply under normal conditions and then lower the price. That is a normal system, right? And so you're going to now have a retraining scheme and you have to decide what the retraining scheme is. But is there a shortage of technical colleges in the UK? Now, personally, I retrained in teaching English, and now I have to retrain again because I want to get out of teaching English. But if someone told me, "Well, why don't you become an electrician?" That doesn't sound very attractive to me. And go, well, they are earning £60,000 a year. The problem was the original decision by the government to open up universities to everybody and promote this technocratic idea of education. And once people have invested in getting a bachelor's degree in something, then to go back and retrain in plumbing, I think some people might go for that. But the question is, why can't they just do it? There's nothing stopping them from going to here it's called TAFE, like a technical college, and learning a trade. The general problem is that these kinds of occupations have other issues with them. And unless you enter them early on, I think they're not that open to everybody. And then they also suffer from issues of supply and demand. It's too much supply and not enough demand.
But anyway, he points out that these downwardly mobile graduates are driving the rise of the Green vote, and in places like Bristol and Brighton. And it's like, okay, they're going to be fairly concentrated in certain areas. But the problem that we would have from a right-wing perspective in dealing with these people is that essentially, I mean, he calls them Corbynite graduates. They've essentially been radicalized by the process of going through the universities. And not only are their expectations completely misaligned with what the reality is, well, their moral compass is completely deformed as well. So they think that essentially communism is ever going to happen, or is a good thing even if it did. And so there is a serious challenge here. And again, this is not something that I think any right-wing party in Britain should take for granted, because actually there is a legitimate argument to be made from the right that there is a duty of care that the state should have for those members of society that have been betrayed, that aren't able to get off of the very bottom of wherever they are on their own. There is something that could be done here from a conservative perspective. That doesn't mean abolishing private property. That doesn't mean hiking up.
Yes, it does. It means exactly abolishing private property. Whatever the state does, it has to expropriate either by taxation or money printing. The state cannot do anything without money. Right? You take away the money, they can regulate, but then they have to enforce the regulations, and that costs money. They need money. Whatever money they have is involuntary expropriation. In other words, it's an infringement on private property. You see, this is a logical point, that the state cannot do anything without infringing on private property. And what Carl Benjamin is proposing here is socialism. So he's saying the state has made these bad decisions. So now we have a duty of care to use the political system and the state to fix this problem. And the question is, are you sure that you're going to fix it, or is it going to be just compounding the problems? Because from an Austrian libertarian, nothing that the state does has any positive effect. All it does is it redistributes, and when it redistributes, it always reduces wealth. It always leads to market distortions, and then it creates problems. Then it has to fix those problems. And so now you're saying, well, we need to fix this problem that the state has caused, and you're saying by this time we're going to get it right.
Extreme taxes. That just means having an eye to it and implementing programs that are feasible, economically affordable, and will get the job done that to help people. There is definitely something the state can do in this regard.
No, there isn't. There's nothing that the state can do in this regard, right? You're still being this classical liberal. You're still sounding exactly the same that you sounded several years ago when you're saying, oh, I still believe that the state, in a welfare state. Well, this is the welfare state. You still believe in the welfare state. And now you're saying you're not a classical liberal, you're not a liberal anymore. But now that is back to that type of thinking. You're still in that type of thinking.
It doesn't have to be just left-wing communist nonsense.
It doesn't have to be left-wing communist. But what's the distinction? How are you distinguishing yourself? All you're doing is saying, I want the state to prefer this group over this group. And they're saying, I want the state to prefer this group over this group. All you want is the same type of solution, namely political solution, to caused by political action in the past. But the difference between you and the lefty is not state versus market. It's the state choosing these people over the state choosing these people. But that's socialism. It's just a different kind of socialism. I guess it's national socialism, right? So it's purely an issue of which group are we going to prefer. Even if you say that you're going to prefer a native group, what you don't understand is that if you prefer this group, like let's say he goes, we're gonna pay off these people's debts, or we're gonna, the other guy, Dan Evans, his solution is rent control, price control. So your solution of retraining is better than his solution of price control. So price control on rent leads to shortages in that market, right? But your retraining isn't gonna lead to a distortion in some other market. His solution will be negative for the market. It will lead to shortages, but your solution will be completely neutral, market neutral. It will not cause any costs in whatever other market. It will just benefit the group that you want to benefit without any costs. So to go back to Thomas Sowell, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. So there are no trade-offs. You're not causing any negative effect in that other market. Like you're gonna start, say, pumping people into trades, that's not gonna now distort that market and cause a glut of tradespeople. Well, I'm not sure, because I mean, around here, I think that there is a lot of that pushing people into these trades, and I see them driving around in their tradie vans and just doing odd jobs. I can't believe that the trading market is completely insulated from being oversaturated with people, and less, any different than the managerial market. Because the thing is that each case, it's not the economy, it's not an economic decision by the market where people demand that service. No, you are now using the state and state money to move people into different markets or control their rent or stuff like that. And from the Austrian point of view, that will always lead to market distortions.
And it doesn't have to be, as he points out, like the industrial productive capitalism. It doesn't have to be an ideological, which is usually called the right wing, Thatcherite commitment to extreme capitalism either. I'm not like an extreme capitalist. I'm all in favor of property ownership, obviously.
You see, no, that doesn't work. You've just characterized libertarianism and market economics as extreme. So you object to people calling you far right, but you will call people like me extreme capitalists. Even though I'm poor, I'm not a capitalist, but I guess I'm an extreme capitalist now, and I'm Thatcherite. So academic agent refers to libertarians as people like Elon Musk and Milton Friedman, and your term of abuse is Thatcherite and extreme capitalist. But you believe in private property, but then you believe in the state doing things, even though it's going to cost money. So therefore, it requires infringement of private property, right? Just logically, the state cannot do anything other than by expropriating. And secondly, whatever the state does is going to distort the market in that area. And so it's going to cause less productivity and misalignment of people's, wants and prices and stuff. And therefore, it will infringe on private property, because private property means I have this amount of money, and in a free market, this amount of money will buy me, say, this amount of extension to the house. But now you're gonna manipulate the trading market, and now it's gonna cost me more. You've just expropriated me through government action by increasing the price of a particular service. I'm not promoting that you should be importing Polish plumbers or tradies. I'm just saying that whatever you do is gonna increase costs for some people, and ipso facto infringe on their private property.
So I do want a market to exist. But the abstract commitment to a free market itself is a kind of ideological mystification.
No. Abstract commitment to a free market, as opposed to what? Concrete benefiting a visible group of people and ignoring the fact that you are thereby taxing more, causing inflation, causing increased prices for other people. Yeah, okay, it's invisible. So in that case, because I'm taking into account the invisible or the less visible effects of your political action, that's a abstract commitment to a free market. Yeah, I have an a priori commitment to the market as being the best system for deciding on how labor and resources are allocated in the economy as opposed to the state. And your commitment is that you're willing to have the market this system be distorted in favor of the state making those decisions. And what is the basis for the belief, the abstract belief, the abstract commitment to state action? When has that ever worked well? Show me one example where that's worked well.
That prevents the thing from working for us, and it turns us into workers for that thing. And that, I think, is just the wrong way round entirely. And when we start addressing these problems in that perspective, as in we say, no, the market will do what we want it to do, and if it doesn't do that, we will just start hemming off parts of it that aren't appropriate.
Well, that's just socialism. That is just the definition of socialism or leftism. That's not a right-wing position. That's a left-wing position. Because the question, I agree with you. Like, let's say you go, I think this works for us. And let's say we agree on what works, you and I. The problem is other people will disagree. And so you have to decide who is the decider. You're saying, well, the politicians, these politicians, the leftist politicians, they were bad deciders. And the right-wing politicians, they were bad deciders as well. But if we get in government, we will be the good deciders. We know what makes the market work for us or for these people. I don't think that's ever worked well anywhere. And to go back to the Austro-libertarian class analysis, right? These two classes, they're the people who are the exploited, which is the taxpayer, and the exploiter, which is the tax beneficiary. And the problem is when you put yourself in a position, the incentive of the tax beneficiary is always to expand to basically exploit the taxpayer as much as possible. So once you go down that road and you go, okay, we're gonna now bend the market to work for us, the incentive is always to bend the market and to exploit the taxpayers and to expand the base of tax beneficiaries.
And we already do this, by the way. There's a reason you can't buy and sell slaves. Like, the slave owners didn't want to give up slaves because they were economically profitable for them. And we said no, because it's not what we think is the right thing to do. And there are various other parts of the market now that could be stopped from doing things that may well be economically profitable, but are actually morally wrong and have a downstream effect on the rest of society that inhibits other kinds of economic growth. Again, mass immigration and the overproliferation of worthless degree-holding millennials. Right? These people are in direct competition with one another, and mass immigration is a completely capitalist, 100% capitalist thing to do. If you're a business owner, for example. Yeah.
The argument there was just so quick, right? That is very difficult because he makes so many logical jumps. So, for example, the Austro-libertarians discuss whether slavery, like let's say I want to sell myself into slavery because I own my own body. Let's assuming I own my own body, can I sell myself into slavery? And there's a lot of these kinds of discussions, right? Or for example, in some societies, if you commit a crime, you pay off by being a slave. And what is that legitimate or illegitimate, right? Whether slavery, either voluntary slavery or slavery as punishment, are legitimate or not. I mean, those are complicated issues. It's just the same thing as like privatizing roads and that kind of stuff. There's a complicated issue, and then you will have different societies doing different stuff, and then working out what is the best arrangement for this particular thing. And the Austro-libertarian position is that there's always a bias toward a free market solution, or the most free market solution possible. There are moral, considerations about the commodification of sex. So you have, these left libertarians that will go, well, we are for people choosing whatever they want to do, and then liberalizing drugs. And Austro-libertarians will look at the history of that type of issue and how it's been dealt with in different situations, and will look at the specifics of the situation rather than making a broad generalization that, well, there are things that we don't accept, like slavery, and therefore we should interfere with the free market in education. What, like you've jumped from slavery to education, or you might jump from drugs to education. I mean, these are different kinds of industries, and historically they've been dealt with differently. Clearly, nationalizing educations, well, not clearly, but when you look at this current situation, it does seem that the whole business of having state-run university systems and schooling systems is not really working on any level, from basic schooling, right, to all the way to tertiary schooling. It's not really providing an educated, properly trained workforce, and it's causing all kinds of market distortions. And then you're jumping to immigration, when immigration it's capitalist. What's happening right now with the mass immigration, all these boats, all these visas, all these foreign students, that's capitalism. I mean, the universities are not capitalist, they're state-run for the most part. The whole thing is so complicated, and there are so many moving parts, that to make an argument from just to say immigration is a free market thing, well, I think that's an interesting discussion, because on the inside, as a teacher, someone who's worked in Asia, as an English teacher, has worked in universities, and schools here in Australia, I don't see much free market there. I mean, it's liberalized, but it's all driven by visas and agencies and all kinds of government interference, all, from beginning to end. And yeah, it might be benefiting large corporations, but are these large corporations exemplars of the free market? I mean, none of it makes really much sense. And the idea that somehow any of these things are reasons against being an extreme capitalist, or, radically pro-free market, I don't think those are the really good arguments.
Yeah, you absolutely want there to be a buyer's market for labour. And so there are right-wing things that we can do that are not necessarily anti-market, but are anti-capitalist in the ideological sense.
They're not anti-market, but they're anti-capitalist. If you're using the state you're entering some market, like the education market, and then you are now going to fund this education over this education, that's anti-market. You now decided we're going to have more plumbers or more electricians or more tradies who are locally trained and fewer immigrants. And I'm not being pro-immigrant here. I'm just saying that what you're doing is anti-market just by the very nature of it. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying you can't say that's not anti-market. It's by definition anti-market because it's not a market process, right? It's not a free market process. And you might say, well, no, education, the free market doesn't work. Okay, you've got to make that argument. It's difficult to make that argument when you have all these regulations on starting schools. Like if I want to start a school, let's say I want to start an English language school, I mean, it's incredibly difficult. It's so many. It was actually an interesting story in Taiwan that the way they do it in Taiwan is that, let's say some foreigner, American, the actual case was an American, and he just rented an office space and started advertising English lessons. And his business grew, right? But he wasn't paying any taxes. He didn't get any permit. He didn't do anything. He just rented a cheap office space and started advertising English lessons and started getting students very quickly. And then the police knew that he's doing this, but they didn't do anything about it. They gave him like 6 months or something to grow his business. And then once his business grew and he had a steady stream of students and was making money, and they could sort of tell, then they came in and they said, look, we understand that you're running a business and we have no problem with it, but now you have to register it and pay taxes. You see, I think that's still statism, but I like that boy. But, and the thing is, I couldn't do that here in Australia. First of all, just renting a space would be so expensive, is prohibitively expensive, right? That's the first part, is just renting an office space would cost me so much money. But for example, in Asia, in China, a lot of people are running businesses out of their house, their apartment. And I can't imagine doing that here. But if you just made those small adjustments, allow people to run a business out of their apartment. There's a guy in China, a Pakistani guy, and he had pizza restaurants. And he told me how he built up his business. And what he did, he was an English teacher in some kindergartens. And he decided, he's like sick of it. And he went on YouTube and on the internet and learned how to make gourmet pizzas. Because in China, it's very difficult to get decent pizza, actually. And he learned how to make gourmet pizza. And he bought a pizza oven, put it in his apartment, and then put his business on an app, baked the pizza. The delivery driver came to his apartment, picked up the pizza, and delivered it to the person. And he ended up opening, like, I think when I was leaving China, he already was opening his third restaurant. So he started in his apartment and then he grew that business. Now, was he, do you need these retraining courses? Most of that stuff, all these courses, all they're going to teach you is how to get your business number and do a business plan and get a bank loan and all this kind of crap. And getting that, and that's why people don't want to do it. And that's why they don't even try. And then they lose all these, the initiative, right? But if instead of proposing what you're proposing, here's my proposal: allow people to run businesses out of their house and don't require them to register or follow any regulations or any business number or anything like that until they reach a certain level of income. I mean, I don't think you should have any regulations because I'm an abstract capitalist, right? Ideologue. So I'm going to say, don't require people to do any business registration or anything like that. Okay. And if people are buying pizza from them, then they're taking the risk. Like if this guy is making a pizza and he's not registered, you can say, well, he's not registered. I take the risk. If I get food poisoning, I've taken that risk because his pizza is cheaper than Pizza Hut. Like it's better, for that same quality, it's cheaper to buy from this guy who's not a registered corporation, right? Let people sell anything without any regulations at street markets, that kind of stuff. Just allow people to engage in whatever business they want without all the status regulation. That's how they do it in Asia, right? You have food markets everywhere, and people don't pay taxes, right? And that's how they get into the business mindset. You can't do that in Western countries. Your proposal is not going to solve that problem that people, plumbers. I mean, seriously? Yeah, there's pizza places, but there are very few options, and for the price, I think the quality is very low. And there's fewer and fewer things here in Australia that you can actually get because there's so many taxes and regulations and stuff that is basically strangling business. And then you have generation after generation with fewer and fewer business skills and less initiative.
Again, I don't want people to misread this as saying I'm for communism. I'm obviously not for communism.
Yes, you are.
You'd have to be an idiot to get to that point. But I agree that
Yeah, but you are making this distinction between what you're saying and communism, and to me that is communism. You see, to you, I'm a radical free market capitalist, and to me, you're a communist because you think communism is this thing in Soviet Union or something, or this Dan. But to me, there's virtually no difference between you and Dan Evans. Almost none, because the only difference is he is pro-immigration or anti-racism, and you are anti-immigration and I guess pro-racism according to him. But in terms of the market, you're no different. So if he's a communist, then so are you. Like you have to explain to me the fine difference that makes him a communist and you and not communism, because I don't understand what is the conceptual distinction other than the immigration issue. From the point of view of the market, you're both communists.
is a problem, right? This is a problem that we would like to fix. And I actually really like his characterization here. Britain's Potemkin knowledge economy. Yeah, that's a great turn of phrase.
Yeah, and I agree, right? But the rentierism idea is that you are anti-business because the knowledge economy, yeah, it's fake, but the whole knowledge economy idea was a statist idea. It was state planning. They were promoting it, okay? And I don't even think that idea is wrong. The problem is that they can't get it exactly right. So if you think about technology, for example, one thing that people say about technology is that its effects are overstated, its short-term effects are overstated, and its long-term effects are understated. So people overstate the change that's going to come very soon. So they get excited and they think it's going to change everything, and it doesn't really. But then they understate the long-term effects. And I think that's exactly what's happened with the knowledge economy. I think the knowledge economy idea is a real idea. The problem is it's only now coming online. And you're seeing, for example, online courses are becoming a real thing. But it took a while, right? So if you were doing online courses 10 years ago, you were like one of the few people, and now you're probably a millionaire. But now the online course thing is really taking off. And I've learned guitar, jazz guitar, and classical guitar online without any face-to-face teachers. In fact, I had face-to-face teachers and I hated it. And then when I was able to buy online guitar courses, to me, it was just amazing because there are so many, they're very affordable, right? And they can use economies of scale because it's all video. And this is really gonna take off. So the knowledge economy is a real thing. Now, these people are looking at the fact that in the short term, that's been overstated, and they're saying, oh, therefore it's a Potemkin village. And I'm not saying that they're wrong in the sense that there's been a misalignment, But the misalignment is not because there isn't a knowledge economy, it's that the state tried to predict the specific timing and character of that economy. So they go, it's a knowledge economy, we're going to throw money at universities, and because knowledge economy. But the knowledge economy is actually creating an alternative system, which if you went through the university system, it's actually not that easy to shift over to this alternative system. The alternative system, the way it works, is different. Let's say I'm a teacher, right? And I work at a school. Every year or every semester, I get a new batch of fresh meat students just coming in. And I'm thinking, well, what I'm teaching, I could be teaching that on my own. Why do I have to be in China and eating the food that I'm already over that stuff? I want to be living in South America or something. Well, I can't be teaching this stuff. And I'm like, it took me a while to figure out, well, the education system has a monopoly on the students, in particular the marketing. They have the established brands. The universities are brands. And that's what they have. And so they can pay you to stand there and just basically deliver content. But if you try to do that on your own, you don't have the marketing. I had to learn marketing. And marketing is its own thing. And so you, Carl Benjamin, you know marketing because you started this company and you understand what I'm talking about. If you want to solve this problem that you identified, what you need really is to teach these people, not plumbing. You need to teach them about marketing so that if they have a skill, they can figure out of what it is that they want to provide specifically, rather than you putting them in a classroom with some teacher teaching them stuff, that working or not. You see, that requires that you have a large number of people that are doing the same thing. Whereas if they learn marketing, they can figure out what it is that they're going to be providing or selling on their local market, because maybe there are different kinds of plumbers, and your retraining will teach them just generic plumbing, but maybe there are specialized plumbing applications, and the guy goes, oh, there's a shortage of this specific type of plumber in my area, and I know how to do that. But the thing is, I need to get customers, and I need to learn how to market my services. Right. So what I was responding to is the knowledge economy, that these people who went through the education system, it's not that there isn't a knowledge economy or demand for knowledge out there. Now, maybe it's not for gender studies. I agree about the gender studies thing. I mean, I don't know whether there's demand for that. But gender studies is not, I don't know what proportion of these graduates studied gender studies. But let's say even if you study gender studies and you decided, I can't sell this. Well, you've read some books, you have some research skills, right? Rather than completely retraining into something completely unrelated, you would want something, use that, what you've learned in gender studies, forget about the content, but you've learned maybe social science research skills, or you learn some teaching skills, or you learn something in that kind of academic environment. You can now go, well, I'm actually interested in, let's brainstorm some niches, okay? And I'm going to create online courses in something where I use some of that university study, okay? And then maybe I have to learn some more, but I'm not going to become a manual laborer, which is what you're when I look at we're going to get on to what you're proposing, which I think I'm skeptical about. Let's have a look.
And so he points out, he closes with this, right? This presents political opportunity. There is a huge opening here for a progressive party that can address these issues, but it needs to emerge soon. Otherwise, popular anger will be funneled into the right. Okay, that's true, I actually think. I do think that the right has superb opportunities here to provide a more comprehensive vision of what the future of this country could be, and to scoop up those lost people who have been betrayed by the previous paradigm and say, no, actually, the country's going to work for you. Like the people who are doing well at the moment, well, actually, they don't need much from the state, obviously. But those people who have been put into suppressive conditions because of state policy when it comes to immigration. So again, immigration is just one of the fundamental problems. But also when it comes to allowing China to flood our market with cheap steel and things like this. Why are we allowing that? Why are we allowing these things? Like,
You see, that's where he's heading, in the sense that now all you want is the British laddie to go back to the steel mill. Immigration is a problem, not because of the free market. Immigration is a problem because of the immigration industry. Immigration is an industry that is funded by the global, the sort of the state, right? And there's a global education system which starts with English language education in international schools in various countries and universities, and then for agents kind of funneling the students into Western universities. And then of course there's this other immigration. There's the boat people, and it's all kind of different, and it's complicated, and none of it is the free market. And then you're gonna put tariffs. So then if we get rid of that, and then you're left with the Polish plumber, and the question is, well, how much of a problem is the Polish plumber? And let's say the Polish plumber will do the job more cheaply than the laddie. See what I'm saying? If you get rid of the mass immigration, the question is, how much of a problem is the Polish plumber? Is that a serious problem? And then if you have these people with degrees, is their best choice to now go and work in a steel mill or become a plumber or a tradie? If China produces steel more cheaply than in the UK, you could produce steel, but higher quality steel. Or you could produce other stuff. And the knowledge economy, the idea that somehow that's dead in the water, I don't think that's true. And it may be that the British laddie is better off actually participating in the knowledge economy, and that really should be for the market forces to decide, and not you. You can't really tell what is the fundamental point about the free market, which you call the abstract capitalism or whatever you call it, is that it's a mechanism for the allocation of labor and capital resources. It's a system for allocation of resources. And the other system, the alternative system, is the system you're promoting, which is the state system, state planning or decision making. Those are two alternative systems for making those decisions. And if you are on the right, you should be for the free market. If you're on the left, you prefer the state. I don't know how you can be on the right and prefer the state as and say, oh, I'm not a communist. Let's say I'm 20% for the 20% of the state. And then you're 20% communist, as far as I'm concerned. But as I said, if you remove regulations on starting a business so that people can just start businesses from their homes, don't have to register anything, don't have to pay any taxes, don't have to deal with regulations, they can just start a business and sell something from their home or on a street market or something like that, I think they would figure out what they want to sell. I mean, I can understand if you don't want people to sell, certain substances. I mean, in Thailand now, weed is legal, and there's a discussion. Okay, is that a good thing? Like, is that acceptable to have legalized sale of weed? If you go to Thailand, you can go to a shop and just like cigarettes, you can just buy weed. And from a libertarian point of view, the bias is toward legalizing and privatizing everything as much as possible. And if you don't have that, and then you go, well, now we're going to pump people into trades, it's just more of the same as far as I'm concerned.
These things all have changed the nature of our country. And we're acting like these things, it's just inevitable and it can't be changed. I don't agree. I think these things can be changed. And I think that actually the right should have a much more visionary perspective on what the future could look like.
Yeah, and more socialistic. I mean, visionary just means more socialistic, more planning. We can plan this out. We can do what's been done in Europe before World War II. I grew up under socialism, and later on I learned about Pinochet and in Chile and the Chicago boys, right? So the libertarians from Chicago went to Chile, and Chile became the most successful, highest growth economy in South America. And the Eastern Bloc countries just went economically bankrupt, and the whole thing collapsed in 1989. And the Polish president, the communist president, his name was Gierek. And apparently he said that he regrets not doing what Pinochet did. In other words, keeping the totalitarian communist system, but liberalizing the economy. And in a way, I'm glad that they didn't, because Poland would have ended up like China, where you still have this party rule, but they've liberalized the economy. But on the other hand, I'm not sure that Poland now really is that different from that. In other words, I think Poland has just gone from being radical central planning to a mixed economy that's going to end up no different from the neoliberal West, like UK and Australia. It's just that they can't really impose high taxes and a big government, because that would just destroy the economy. So they still have to be fairly liberal. But in reality, I think that these East European countries are just as regulated and taxed similarly as the developed West. And so what you would have is a kind of, let's say if the UK was like that, it would be culturally homogeneous, but fairly low income. And you go, well, but that's good. That's a good thing. We would sacrifice economics for culture. And my sense is, well, Poland was homogeneous under communism and everyone was poor. They hated that. They're happier now because of more freedom and better economics. This is the best mix: cultural homogeneity and economic freedom, but not too much. But you still have Polish plumbers going to the UK, right? They prefer to earn the income in the UK. And would more liberalization in Poland mean more immigration? If you want cultural homogeneity, okay, limit the immigration, but why not liberalize the economy more? Now, I don't know exactly how liberal the Polish economy is, but I was looking, for example, at tax rates, and Polish income tax rates are not that low relative to other European countries. They're actually reasonably high. And then the incomes are quite low. I was looking for work in Poland as an English teacher at university. I'm basically a university level English teacher, and the income is just ridiculously low. I would basically have to work full-time at the university and get another job just to be able to pay rent and utilities and food. Now, the university that I applied to, it was a state university. Like, why is the Polish government funding universities? And then these universities, a lot of them seem to be pumping leftist ideology. Just my observation. So why not just cut all of that stuff out? Privatize the universities, get rid of regulations. Why not do that? Or because it's extreme capitalism. I think the bias should be for free market solutions. That should be the starting point. Not the starting point on the right should not be, I'm not a Thatcherite. I'm not a Thatcherite. No. Thatcherite is bad. I don't know exactly what happened with the Thatcherite stuff and why it was so bad. Because I'd have to look at the history to see what were the specifics of Thatcherite Britain to understand why people like Carl Benjamin have such a visceral dislike of Thatcherite free market policies, because I don't know exactly what she did. I can understand that leftists don't like it, but I don't understand why people on the right don't like it. What it is that happened that was so bad. Okay, thank you for listening, and talk to you next time.